Thank you for listening to Footnotes, a Fellowship Mosaic podcast. This is a space for us to dig deeper into Scripture, what is happening in our community and culture, and continue the conversations we start on Saturday nights. We are excited to have you join us as we pursue truth, holiness, and redemption together.
Hey, it's Noetz. Welcome to Footnotes. Really glad to be with you. I got Scott here with me.
Hey, everybody.
And I got Chris Simon here with me.
Hello, thank you.
Yeah, Chris, you're new to the pod, so I'll just give you a little bio. I first met Chris a few years back when I was in a position of trying to figure out what am I doing with my life, and he stepped in as a counselor over me, or kind of a I don't know what you would have called that, like a coach, like a life coach a bit. And so we met for a couple of weeks in a row, and felt like that was a really helpful grounding season for me. And so I don't think you're doing that anymore. You're kind of in a new lane, or a more predominant lane for you. So tell us a little bit about what lane you're in.
Yeah, so my main focus is I work in the counseling community. I work as a practitioner, I work as a trainer, I work as a teacher, kind of do everything, but my real focus is around addiction, and particularly sexual addiction. So I like to say my specialty is sexual addiction, sexual abuse, and affair recovery, the really important things that nobody wants to talk about.
Yeah, well, we just spent a couple weeks talking about sexual addiction or sexual sin around Mosaic, so I hope it makes sense why he would be in the room. But I wanted to spend a few minutes kind of unpacking the story together. Scott and I had taught. I got to kind of open the whole thing up and leave it on a really uncomfortable cliffhanger of like, he hasn't fooled God. He might have fooled the people around him, but he hasn't fooled God. And Scott kind of got to pick it up from there and run through Nathan's rebuke and what kind of came out of that. And even I think we even ended the story not really in the fullness of the story. It kind of ends before the actual scriptural story ends. But for the sake of the conversation today,
we ended it in the moment that kind of went up for a second, where David confessed, well, I have sinned against the Lord.
Yeah.
But then there's a whole lot of stuff that the Lord does after that, and in ways that David responds to the Lord in rightful and inspiring obedience too. That's pretty cool. Yeah. My community group actually kind of read the rest of the story last night, and most of our conversations were centering around the pieces that we hadn't covered after verse 13. So I encourage you guys to go do that.
That's cool. Well, I wanted to kind of ask Scott, the experience for me of like really wrestling with David's story was, one, I was noticing all of the hints of sin in my life. I got called out by my wife about a week before the teaching of like some just overly harsh parenting, and I had to go like circle back, and I just went home and picked up my kids, and like one at a time was kind of pulling each of them aside to have like vulnerable conversations, just say, man, I messed it up. I'm really sorry. And obviously there was lots of other things coming up in me all week of just like deep inadequacy, but also like seeing the pattern of like, it's not the first thing. Like I didn't get to the place I was parenting them just in a drop. It was like a series of not dealing with it all day long in the way I ought to have, that left me in a place of just going like, I'm going to yell and I'm going to not be a good dad at this point. And so, so just noticing that pattern unwinding was just pretty vulnerable, and didn't like it, and was grateful that the story was kind of dragging that up in me, and was grateful that the Lord, I guess, put me in that vulnerable place of like needing to study that story deeply and leave myself open for conviction there. So, what was preparation like, or what was the abiding lesson, or you can kind of take it wherever you need to.
Well, I might have had a similar story. I not necessarily with parenting, but I have really had a hard couple weeks where my struggle with anxiety, specifically relating to my relationships, my friendships, and my susceptibility and desire to believe the lies from the enemy about my identity and my belonging or my meaning. It kind of took a head and got to a place where I found myself really low, and even just yesterday, kind of still coming up from a lot of the studying that I had done in ways that I'd been praying because of these passages, was just finishing a run and ran by my neighbor's house and stopped my run to talk to them. And within 20 seconds, my neighbor said, "Why the long face?" And they just saw the heaviness in me. And I just just kind of confessed and started crying with my neighbor. I've just felt so sinful lately. I've just felt so dark. Like I believe lies so easily, and I give so much ear to the enemy's voice, which is why so much of my teaching ended up kind of revolving around our susceptibility to pervert good around us, to take good things and a good reality, good gifts that God's given us or blessings that exist in our lives, and just find ways in our selfishness or fear to start twisting them and to start making them a little darker, Yeah. That's kind of where I've been at.
Yeah, that's good. Well, kind of in the heart of looking at the story kind of from that lens of it wasn't just the fall. It wasn't just the moment that set him off, but it was a series of moments building up to and a series of moments coming out. There was a lot of opportunities for the whole narrative to be a fundamentally different narrative had he at any point stepped out and done something differently. And instead, he threw a tarp over the thing and said, "You don't know what's under there." And it was still very clearly the shape of a man under a tarp, and or whatever. That's a terrible analogy, but you get the vibe. So David did come off the rails around sexual sin, and as a guy who's just walking deeply with people through that very sensitive place. I'm going to guess, I'm going to kind of do a leading question, but it's probably not surprising at all that happened. What do you got thoughts around that, Chris?
Yeah, as I spent some time looking at this passage before and just seeing how amazing David was before, right? Of the constantly times we see him, David went and sought the Lord.
Yeah.
Like we saw that time and time again in the 20 chapters before and end of 1 Samuel and beginning of 2 Samuel. And then we have this piece that says, and he stayed while his commanders went off to war.
Yeah.
We don't hear anything that he sought the Lord, and that's what the Lord told him to do.
Yeah.
And so my thought is this something he wanted? Is this a stepping back from the responsibility that was given to him by God? Yeah. We don't know.
Yeah.
But I see the circumstances is, okay, all of his commanders go off to war. This is right after they fight, I think, the Ammonites. Mm-hmm. And his commanders, Joab, all his good friends, commanders, and people close to him are gone.
Yeah.
They're off doing what the Lord's called them to do, and he's alone at the palace. Mm. I mean, my thought is that's the same if my wife says, "Hey, I'm taking the kids and we'll be gone all day." My first thought is, okay, I need to be very conscientious what I do with my time here.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's an easy time. That old phrase, idle hands are the devil's playground.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, and thinking about David, this is a guy with so much wisdom, skill, and ability, is now alone, isolated in his palace.
Yeah.
So there's the first thing that jumps out. The second one that jumps out is, so what do you do when you're bored? Oh, I'm just walking around my palace. I just happen to be on my roof, just hanging out.
Yeah.
Right. And the same thing. I often don't go looking for trouble, but if I have that idle mentality and no purpose and just kind of going from place to place to place, I find things.
Yeah.
And we live in a sinful world, and I'm a sinful person. And
yeah.
oftentimes those are sinful. And then David looks, and there's Bathsheba. Yeah. And so he asked his servants, hey, go find out who that is.
Yeah.
Again, nobody's there to look at them who has the depth of the relationship to say, do you really want to do that, David?
Yeah.
Do you think that is a good idea? No, all those people are gone.
Yeah.
Because he has this relational isolation. Then he goes and meets with Bathsheba, invites her in. Again, if Bathsheba hears this, the king wants to see you. What's she going to say? No.
Yeah.
Like that, she didn't really have much choice in that.
Sure.
And if you want to talk about abuse of power, it's a whole nother conversation for another day. But then he ends up having this sexual sin with Bathsheba.
Yeah.
Okay. He knows that it's wrong. So he goes and brings Uriah back. And again, remembering Uriah was part of David's 30. Yeah. Uriah was one of his good friends.
Yeah. Deep relationship.
They spent years running through the wilderness together away from Saul. And this is the person whose wife he slept with. So think about somebody you've had a 10-year relationship with, and that's the person that Bathsheba was.
Yeah.
And just the depth of that betrayal. And this is way more than seeing an attractive woman and saying, I want that. There's so much relational sin, neglect, selfishness that's in that comes through.
And you're saying that you noticed when you were reading the story, the things that led to it, the isolation you said, then followed by idle hands or idle behavior, and then finishing with what?
Then I think it's this abuse of power.
Abuse of power.
Authority. right? Same thing. I'm a professional counselor, and there's so many ethics and guidelines around having relationships with clients and all this because it's not an equal relationship.
Yeah.
I'm seen as a person of authority. Now, how you want to define that, completely different story.
Sure.
But that people respect because of the title. I mean, king,
Yeah.
amplify that by 100.
Yeah.
And he goes and says, come to my palace. Bathsheba probably knew it was going, but she couldn't stop him.
Yeah.
And then after that sin happens, he has this repentant heart. I don't know if repentant is the right word, but he recognizes his sin. And he says, okay, she's pregnant. Let's bring Uriah back. And then maybe I can hide this whole thing that happened.
Yeah.
Which, again, think about this one sin of letting his sexual desires run away with him and have an affair with a woman. Okay, now in order to cover that up, the amount of lies, deceptions, and manipulation that comes afterwards.
Yeah.
And that's something I see with a lot of my clients who are struggling with sexual sin, is even partners will say, the fact that you had this sexual affair hurts. Yes. The amount of lies, deceptions, and manipulation afterwards is often exponentially worse than the singular act of sin.
Yeah, it's an eroding of trust, like a perpetual, I can't even trust your word. Like, yeah, that's big.
And that happened here too, right? And so he brought Uriah, he tried to get him drunk, he did all this. Then he showed to be a man of greater character than David.
Yeah.
And so David's response is he needs to go.
Yeah.
And so if you want to talk about the fall from, he was a man after God's own heart. He constantly sought the Lord's guidance and what we should do. When he had multiple opportunities to kill Saul, he said, I will not lay my hand against the anointed one of God.
Yeah.
And then we see this completely different character shift.
Yeah. Is there any sense as you were kind of like taking that deep dive through the story, were you anticipating where it turned, or is there any kind of hint that you, I don't know, just as a reader, or I know you had a history of being a pastor and you also have this training as a counselor now. Is there anything in any of your training that you're like, I saw it coming because of this or because of that?
And that's, I think, the scariest part. No.
No.
Yeah.
You look at the 20 chapters leading up to it, and he's not perfect because nobody's perfect. But if you look at his pattern, he constantly seeks God. He's a man of righteousness. He pushes against evil. When people ask him to kill Saul, he says, no, I will not do that. He stands for his morals and his convictions.
Yeah.
And then chapter 11.
Yeah.
And we also see in all of those instances of him standing for his morals and convictions and obedience to the Lord and seeking the Lord, or he sought the Lord was the phrase that you said comes up over and over again. He is often or maybe always in community or surrounded by brothers or surrounded by friends or people that are encouraging him toward obedience with the Lord, and also not idle. He is walking in purposes or callings in some way, carrying out what the Lord had put before him. Not that it was sinful that he was home alone in the palace, but kind of going back to what you said a little bit ago, the idleness of his hands and the lack of accountability that was present before he sinned with Bathsheba is what you noticed to be very different about what we see in his life up to that point.
Right. And going back all the way to Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3, we see that God made Adam. He walked in perfect union with God. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? I don't know, but he's frolicking through the Eden with God in this union that we'll never experience. Yeah. And then God turns to Adam and says, you know what? Perfect relationship with me. It's not enough. You need a companion.
Yeah.
This is pre-fall.
Yeah.
And so what it really highlights for me is we were made for God, yes, and we were made for other people.
Yeah.
We were not built to be in isolation and to live life alone, as so many people in our culture do. And that, I think, I don't know if sin nature, which happens in chapter 3, changes that, but when we're isolated and alone, it erodes. Even, Scott, as you're talking about those anxieties that you had and how they took over, like that's what happens. Yeah. When I'm alone with my thoughts, how often my thoughts are very positive but uplifting, and after half an hour of lonely isolation, I feel better. Not often, not unless I go in there purposely with an intent to do some prayer, to do some meditation, to read scripture.
Well, even those are you not being alone. It's you going like, I'm not here alone. I'm with the triune God of the universe. And because of that, my spirits are lifted. But yeah, I mean, there's a buddy of mine from back in the day that wrote a song where he said, the mirror says the cruelest things of all. And by that, the thought that stirs up in me is the there's something about like when I'm left to myself and when I'm in that reflection space, it doesn't take much for me to see the worst parts of myself, to feel furthest away from what I hope and aspire to be, to be like just to see the worst version of myself. And so imagining like that total isolation of community kind of drawn out over, I don't know how long they've been, but long enough to finish the battle that kind of ramps up in chapter 10. The chapter 10 story is also, I read it to my boys the other night because it's so funny. Like the kids are just giggling that the Jews are shamed because they get half a beard shaved and they get the butt of their pants cut out. So they're just walking around half bearded and butts out. And of course, my boys who like draw butts on everything were like, this is the best story. Like you're not even telling us the truth. That's not in there. So anyway.
That's not in there, Dad. Yeah. That is.
So funny to read anyway. So I do think that pattern that you've kind of teased out there of like it's idleness. It is a series of building events. I missed the one before idleness. Isolation, then idleness. It's not the prescribed way, but it is in working back. I'm trying to remember where this happened for me, but there was some process that they had me walk where like, if you notice the sin pattern, your goal is to like work back what was going on in you when you started down that path. Like try to trace it back as far as you can get to like see, is there always a first step? Because if there's always a first step that ends in this like destruction, like identify that first step and then be so vigilant about that. If it's always when my wife leaves and I'm home alone, then you go, when she leaves, I leave, and that at least solves that same problem. There's probably gonna be a new problem, but I'm gonna trace it back as far as I can to find those like root behaviors that inform where I end up unthinkingly often. That it's just the quote I used in the sermon was the quote from C.S. Lewis about the screw tape. The demon is talking about the path to hell being a gradual one. That the goal is like, just don't let him turn or bend or notice signposts or anything. Just keep him on this slow, gradual, hellbound path, just step after step. And when I can turn back around and walk back up the path and go, where did I like turn off onto this road? There's something very needed for my soul and for the guards that God has put around me to be there and to notice that. So let me pull up my questions here. You got a thought?
Yeah. So that lack of community, I think, is the first one.
Yeah.
I think that second one is those idle hands.
Yeah.
And even if you think about, again, pre-fall, man was made to tend to the earth.
Yeah.
Like we weren't meant to just sit leisurely. And I think we have this American Western ideal now that is to get rich and retire at 40 and do nothing. And that's not how God made us. Mm-mm. Like my wife gives me a hard time sometimes on weekends that I do so much around the house and piddle, and we have a little bit of land and take care of it. I'm like, I enjoy it. I think there's something God honoring in that because he made us to take
grounding,
care of it. And has the fall marred that? Yes, but the original desire is there.
Yeah.
So now David, who was a warrior for years, is a king, is now alone, isolated at his palace with nothing to do.
Yeah.
And thinking in the addiction work I do, that stair step you're talking about, it's often how we do it. We go back the stairs and say, what led to this? And 99% of the time, it's an emotion, not an action.
Yeah.
And the two biggest ones we see are lonely and bored. And guess what's happening here?
Yeah.
He's lonely and he's bored.
Yeah. Wow.
And so that, again, we are built for that connection, and we're built to do something, be it worship God, be it be in relationship with other people. And he's walking around without any of that.
Yeah.
And what happens? Sin slowly creeps in.
Yeah. Is this is maybe you warned me beforehand not to ask too like questions that are off the path here, but I'm responding to you saying boredom and thinking about just the stuff that I was listening to on the way into the office today was about a guy kind of leading his church through a digital fast, and just the lack of experience of true boredom that people are having because of the instantly accessible wealth of more information than the world has ever known. It's the Library of Alexandria held in my hand tenfold or whatever. And any thoughts on maybe what you see from people that let themselves get bored that is healthy or unhealthy, or maybe healthy ways to deal with boredom that aren't just start down the path of we end up at sin?
I think you're hitting something significant there. Is we live in the most stimulated culture that humans have ever said.
Yeah.
I don't mean sexually stimulate, but just we're at a stoplight and we're checking our phone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, when was the last time you actually listened to elevator music and didn't check your Twitter?
Yeah.
Like, we don't know what it is to sit and pause even for 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And this is not how God made us. If you look throughout the Bible, and I've spent a lot of time with my mentor on this, of this idea of the passage that say, be still, wait upon the Lord, lean into him, rest with him, waste time with me.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many commandments, declarative statements from Jesus that says, do nothing.
Yeah.
And yet we don't like to hear those much.
No, yeah, my gut is like do the one where is it Elijah that like sprints in front of the chariot and beats it into the city? I'm like, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be running faster than like the cars around me. Let's go. So
And yet every time Jesus did a major miracle, almost every time, it says he went away to a lonely place to be with God.
yeah,
That we need that quiet. And I think in our digital age, we need that more than ever. And I've experienced my own life. We've started practicing a Sabbath. We actually do it from the start of Mosaic, so 5 o'clock on Saturday to 5 o'clock on Sunday.
Yeah.
And we do no electronics.
cool.
And it's funny, the kids are at it better than we are.
Oh, are they really?
Because we're checking the weather. Oh, shoot.
Yeah.
And but the whole idea is we don't need to be stimulated. We don't need to pursue and get entertainment. We just need to choose a relationship. And whether that's sitting in building Legos with my boys for 2 hours, which Nate, you did the other day, which was wonderful, or we're reading a book, or we're running in the backyard, checking the apple trees, or whatever it is, like, just slow down.
Yeah.
And I've noticed this in my own life. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was having trouble sleeping. And I live a fairly disciplined and regimented life with morning routine, evening routine, hearing such horrible stories all day long. I found there's a lot of these that help me to release these ideas and these thoughts I hear. But at bed, I noticed my mind was going. I couldn't stop it. And I listened to some of my own therapy advice I tell people and said, maybe I should do some time slowing down. And I did some meditation.
Yeah.
And so now for the past 3 weeks, every night before I go to bed or wash my face, go to bed, and I actually lay on my bed, close my eyes, and do 5 minutes of meditation. And what does that meditation look like? For me, it's closing my eyes and picturing one of the apple trees in my backyard that we just planted them this year, so they're more sticks.
Yeah.
And they've got some buds on them. And so what I do is I just picture those limbs with the buds on. And every time a thought comes to my mind, I don't chastise myself. I don't beat myself up. I say, hey, not right now. And I picture hands kind of pushing them out of my mind. And it's amazing. I'd have 15 thoughts in the first 10 seconds coming to my mind.
Yeah.
But after doing it for 5 minutes, I notice they don't come as frequent.
Yeah.
And now that I've done this for a couple weeks now, I fall asleep in about 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah.
It amazes me. But part of this constant simulation culture is it's teaching our brains you need to always be going 100 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And part of what I think a lot of the invitations from the Lord said is, I want you to be slow.
Yeah.
Again, God doesn't need us. He chooses us.
Yeah.
He could do it without it. The rocks can cry out and sing. He wants us to do it with him. And one of the things he wants to do with us more than anything is to be still, to bask in his love and his presence. And when we do that, the hustle and bustle, I think, gets a little less enticing.
Yeah, that'll preach, friend. That's good.
I'm really moved by the way that you just explained that the fix to needing community and needing to not have idle hands is not busyness and friendship, because we live in a world where people do not stay idle purposefully, and also where people surround themselves often with community or places like coffee shops or bars or whatever, where people are. So the problem is not how many people you have around and whether or not your schedule is empty and you gave yourself too much time to sin. It was actually this invitation from the Lord to let him be the person you're idle with and to have community with him. You need community. You need work. You need purpose. To not have those things is bad for you, but find them with me. And then ripples of health will start cascading throughout your life, your work, your family.
And not find them in the essence itself, right? Work is a great thing. God calls us to work. but our purpose does not work.
Yeah.
Family is a great thing, but I know plenty of people, and I talk through a lot of clients whose family and kids are their idols that they worship, and that if they lose, they would be destroyed.
Yeah.
Like God is supposed to be that.
Yeah.
And this boredom can be an enemy, but it can also be a place of solitude and sanctuary. Yeah. And the only difference is our mindset. It's not the actual action.
Yeah.
And I think Jesus talks about this really well when he talks about the motivations of our heart. Am I going to quietness because I'm so overwhelmed, I'm running away for things? Or am I taking a step towards God and towards quietness?
Yeah.
Same action, but then it's a different experience as well.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a sense of if I'm giving up and throwing my hands up and sprinting away from it, that's one thing. But if I am open-handed to the Lord, saying I really can't handle all of this, it's more than I can be entrusted with, because I know myself and I know you, and I know I'm supposed to bring this to you. They're hands up, hands open, but two totally different heart postures, and so. That's good. I like that thought. Maybe a close. You gotta.
Yeah, I'm thinking before we close, could you give anyone who's listening some encouragement or advice if they find themselves at that place of rebuke or conviction? We talked a little bit ago about the manipulation and lies and desire to run away from the punishment or the retribution that God might have for you. I don't want the consequences, and so I'm just going to kind of make the matter worse by continuing to lie or compound the things that originally were sinful by making them worse. Do you have any advice for those of us who find ourselves listening to these past 2 weeks of sermons, or diving into these passages ourselves, or getting into the story and leaving feeling like, man, I know that thing that God or my friends would rebuke in me, and I really desire freedom. I really desire to stop this cycle of pushing away the consequences.
My first thought is 1 John 1 and 2, right? To bring stuff that's in the dark into the light. Oftentimes we think and catastrophize what will actually happen if I confess something. Because, again, our mind, it's something in psychology we call the negative bias. We always think the worst in things.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of sin, right? But in our mind, if I confess a sin to you, Scott, in my mind, I'm always playing out the worst case scenario where you judge, condemn, criticize me, and don't want to be my friend anymore. Mm-hmm. 99% of the time, that's not what happens. Yeah. But in my mind, I'm acting like it's a certainty. And I just want to tell people it's not. I have a lot of clients ask, how do I confess and share things with people? And the best way I like to describe that is, don't focus so much on what are you going to say. If you choose the right, safe person, it doesn't matter how you say it.
Yeah.
They will show you grace and compassion and empathy. And that's what we're really after, because that's what Jesus did. Yeah. When we experience that empathy, we experience that loving, I see you and I still love you, it inspires us to push our sin away. Yeah. I don't want to do that anymore. And so if you're struggling with sexual sin, if it's greed, if it's workaholism, if it's money, whatever it may be, my thought is God is bigger, and there's a path forward. And with my clients with sexuality, I say, whether you're a sex addict, whether it's a bad habit, whether it's habituation, it doesn't matter what you want to call it.
Yeah.
Is it causing harm in your life you want to change? Yeah. Great. Let's work on it.
Yeah.
And so let this just be an invitation for you to share that with someone else, to open that journey up and just say, I'm struggling, I need help. And in the recovery circles, we talk about shame. There's two types of shame. There's toxic shame, which we know really well. I'm worthless, I'm a piece of crap, all these things.
Yeah.
But there's also healthy shame, as John Bradshaw talks about in his 1980s book that nobody's taken farther, Healing the Shame That Binds You. But he says healthy shame is a simple acceptance that I'm not God and I have limitations.
That's good.
And I think in our 21st century America, we say, no, I can do everything. No, you can't. And you know what? You're still perfect. You're still wonderfully and beautifully made, and you're still worthwhile. And so even if you have a sin, even if you have a struggle, that doesn't make you less than. That makes you a participant in the human experience. Yeah. And even more so, that's why Christ came, is for you and to pull you out of that so that you can experience his love more.
Amen, Chris.
It's really good. It's really good. Is there a question that I wasn't smart enough to ask you that you'd want to close on? Any closing final thought? That felt like a final thought, but I want to just make sure while we got you here.
I would just reiterate what I just said.
Okay. That's good.
Hiding is the darkest, scariest place to be.
Yeah.
There's a saying in 12 Steps that says we're only as sick as our secrets.
Yeah. Healing in the revealing, for sure.
And one of the best things I've done through 15 years of recovery myself is being able to say, there's nothing in my life that anybody could point out and say, aha, I caught you.
Yeah.
Like, no, it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have sins. I have mistakes. I have struggles I still have. I know and I own those and they're part of my story, but that doesn't make me less than.
Yeah.
That doesn't make me unworthy. If anything, it makes me more understanding, more appreciative for God's grace and what he's done for me. And so if you're listening, the same thing. That sin doesn't take you away. It's an invitation, just as David, as Peter, as Mo, as all the major figures of the Bible had their own crucible that made them men and women after God's own heart. And this challenge can become that crucible that makes you into a closer child of God.
Yeah, that's good. Well, Mosaic, I hope you have someone that you feel safe with. And if you don't, I hope you find someone around Mosaic that is a safe person.
If not, come grab any of the three of us.
Yeah.
Amen.
I've known a lot of safe people at Mosaic. So, and with that, we'll just say we love you, and we're looking forward to wrapping up David's life this weekend. And if there was ever a time where I was more excited about just the hopefulness of the Easter message, I don't know if there's been a time where I've been primed like it, of just thinking through sin so much before I really get to the hopefulness of it. And so really looking forward to celebrating Tenebrae and Easter with all of you. We love you. We'll see you soon. Peace.